I'd like to begin by saying these are musings rather than anything tangential. I'm not working towards any paper or any idea about these, but I would welcome any comments or questions on this possibility. What it basically comes down to is when I was doing some interviews in Minsk in December, everybody that I spoke to said that the Belarusian regime is changing. There is this new normal. No one could really define what this new normal was, but they were telling me that this is a new normal and this is something to look out for in the Belarusian regime and Belarusian politics. And what I want to kind of explore is why this new normal, if we can call it that, came about. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at what should have happened, what did happen, is this actually a new normal, and a conclusion. I welcome any feedback and any ideas as to whether I can progress this in the future. If we take the definition of authoritarianism by Juan José Lins in 1964 and expanded on by Castro Correction in 1995, ultimately, thank you, Peter. Ultimately, all authoritarian regimes want to do is maintain control at any cost. So they take control of political institutions like political parties, the electoral system, parliaments, the judiciary, and the economy, and they try and maintain control with these and maintaining their own power base and consolidating power. So taking this into account, I think it fits very nicely with the Belarusian regime, minus perhaps the political parties. So what should have happened? As I say, last year I spoke about Belarus's preventative counter-revolution, which began in 2001 with the fall of Slobodan Milosevic in 2000 in Serbia, and ratcheted up until around about 2004. And the Belarusian regime learned how to overcome the protests. This was seen effectively in 2001, 2006 and 2010 during the political demonstrations. And I have some photos of the political demonstrations. I apologise that they're slightly grainy. But this is a conversation, as you can see, between the security services and a couple of protesters during the 2006 denim jeans revolution. This is another conversation between one police officer and a protester during 2010. So the Belarusian regime had cracked down, as in the 2000s, on protest, and ultimately with the Euromaidan being a so-called democratic protest, it should have been quite wary of this possibility of a neighbouring country having protests and having demonstrations, and yet to an extent it didn't seem to have this process. I don't want to go into detail about the Euromaidan. We should know all about it. It lasted about 4 months. This is a photo of the protests on January 16th, I believe, when Yanukovych signed the dictatorship laws into legislation, and they became law. And these are the crowds that he was met with in central Kiev at Maidan. So I'm not saying, I've only begun to really look at this, I'm not saying that the Belarusian reaction was not different to how it had been in the so-called color revolutions. The state media reaction was, this is violent, unstable, we don't need this in Belarus. Lukashenko talked of a coup, and the protests were wrong. There were other people in the regime who did the same. But there was no vociferous dialogue. In 2005, Lukashenko came out with a great quote that he was going to beat a pink, orange, or even banana revolution. There wasn't anything like this, or it wasn't as strong during the Euromaidan. And like I say, I've only just begun to look at this. So what is meant by the new normal? From what I could gather from the interviews that I did, it seems that the situation has changed. As one of my interlocutors told me, if it was in Britain, no one would have noticed. But in Belarus, things happen very slowly in the political system, in the reforms of the political system. So this is something that has changed, and we can see it. It's difficult to say whether this will remain the case. The last Belarusian EU rapprochement in 2008 culminated very quickly in 2010 with when the regime cracked down on the protests in 2010. So why did the new normal occur? Well, ultimately, as far as I can see, it happened primarily because it was different. Russia intervened very quickly, annexed Crimea. It also sent little green men into the Donbass. The Donetsk People's Republic and the Luhansk People's Republic were created. And this played on regime fears, not just Lukashenko's fears, but people within the Belarusian regime, different factions. We also have to remember that I believe Ukraine is the third biggest trading partner with Belarus after Russia, of course, and either the Netherlands or the United Kingdom, I'm sure Peter would know. But 11% of Belarus's exports go to Ukraine, and 4% of Ukrainian imports come to Belarus. So, as I say, the regime feared the potential for a possible Russian intervention. There's different factions within the regime, and it appears, some people were telling me, that the so-called reformers have come to the ascendancy in the Lukashenko regime. They have his ear, as it were. There were cases of Russian nationalist intervention in Belarus, the so-called Cossack brotherhoods and conservative groups. And when I was in Minsk, 3 Russian nationalists had been arrested by the Belarusian regime for attempting to sow discord and have begun apparently to talk about the Belarusian regime being similar to the Ukrainian regime. It was becoming a fascist junta with taking away Russians' civil and political rights, which in a country where the vast majority of people speak Russian on their day-to-day basis is a little hard to believe. The 28th Armed Division of the Russian Armed Forces, which had traditionally been a Siberian division, was moved to Lindsay in the Bryansk Oblast, in the corner between Ukraine and Belarus, ostensibly so should something happen in Kharkiv, in Ukraine, the Russian army could get to Kharkiv quite quickly. However, this alarmed the Belarusian regime. There's been examples of Belarusian border guards and the Belarusian army also moving towards the Russian border, although it's not been very obvious. The notion of the border posts, of course, these get set up every now and then on the Belarusian-Russian border, but the fact that they've happened now seems to show that there's a different conception between the Belarusian and Russian regime at the moment. So, what is the new normal? As I say, it's hard to say at the moment. It's a change, from what I've been able to see, it's a change in perceptions of the regime. The regime has become cleverer to an extent. Gone are the days, as one of my interviewees said, where if Alexei Navalny had been Belarusian, not Russian, he'd been in prison, he'd have been exiled, or he may even have disappeared. The Belarusian regime seems to have become slightly cleverer in how it maintains its power. There's been an evolution of tactics as such. So as I say, the change in perception is that Russia is no longer the economic and political protector. It no longer bolsters, well, it does bolster Belarus, but it's seen as a threat by people in the regime at the moment. And there is an increasing need to engage with the West, if for no other reason than to let other people know about Belarus and to let them to disengage from its reliance on Russia. So what can we see? Well, not much. This is Belarus after all, but there have been some changes. Before the 2015 presidential election, there were release of political prisoners. The Belarusian regime has been highly cynical. During the presidential election in 2015, Tatiana, which was given some leeway to campaign, she wasn't sent to jail. The regime has also been cynical in terms of the 2016 parliamentary elections. Now, showing the West that the lower house of parliament is not just a regime mouthpiece with 109 pro-regime deputies. Now there's only 107. Belarus has two entirely independent, allegedly, parliamentarians, Jelena Anasim and Anna Komenskaya of the United Civil Party. There's also been, it appears, from what I was told, there's been an order from on high that the police cannot be seen to be beating protesters on the streets and arresting them on the streets. They can do it round the corner from the cameras, they can do it off screen, they can also go to people's houses, but there hasn't been an overt arresting of potential demonstrators. And the apparatus of the power vertical has been reduced. The problem for the regime is quite simple. If this is the case, and I don't quite believe that it is, that the regime has started to liberalise and is not using coercion as overtly as it used to, the problem is that the regime can't be seen to be weak. If it allows demonstrators one day, then it's quite possible that other factions of society might also demonstrate, allowing the regime, making it hard for the regime to decide whether to crack down on those protesters or to allow them to happen. And if that does occur, then it becomes much harder for the regime to maintain power. So that's about that. And in regards to is the new normal, again, like I say, it's hard, at the moment it's hard to tell. The coercive tools of the regime are very effective. Lukashenko has been in power since 1994. He has a very consolidated, very effective practices of repression. The apparatus is still very much there. However, at the moment, allegedly, the reformers are in the ascendancy, although they still believe that Lukashenko is the best of, well, there isn't an alternative to Lukashenko, and it's better to make him change slowly and allow him to stay in power. So, where is it? But like I say, there have been some changes. So it is possible to see a new normal. Whether this lasts is open to interpretation. It's too early to say. I don't want to stand out here in front of you all and say this is the Belarusian regime is liberalising. This is a new thing that we're seeing. It needs to rely. It needs to ingratiate itself with the West to improve its economy. Russia is no longer the only possibility, and therefore that allows it to try and improve its political system and to show that it is reforming, however slowly. However, I would say those reforms are highly cynical in that regard. So I realise that my presentation is very quick. Like I say, these are just musings from what I had when I was out doing interviews. And I would welcome any feedback about this and any ideas as to how I can progress it, or whether the clause isn't rubbish and I should just stop talking now. I would like to thank you for your time and for listening to me, and yes, thank you very much.